Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Guys Who Stare at Stats. I'm Cade Kennedy alongside Tyler Riggs. And Tyler, we have a bit of a treat today.
Yeah.
We're going to do something a bit different than how we've done it the last 2 years. Usually when we do these season preview videos for college football, I would have the schedule up, we'd look at it, we'd go team by team, and the last time we did that, we were trapped in this room for 9 hours. So hopefully...
Not a lie. Yeah.
Not a lie. Hopefully... For the sake of, we've crunched into 4 conferences we're covering now instead of 5. Rest in peace, Pac-12. It was a good conference. But also, we've decided to use a tier list to help this time. Instead of just, you having to remember it, we have something that can remember it for you.
There you go.
So we'll still probably have our 5 minutes of debating every single team. Some things you can't change. No. And it's going to start pretty quick here in the Big 12 video because our first team up, remember, the way we're going to do this, we're going by preseason poll ranking. This is not what me or you think is going to be the best team. What's going to be shown up here is my views. Tyler's views will obviously differ from mine. As, any of these. Never, yeah. No March Madness videos, no season preview videos. We've always had the same opinion. But before we get going into that, as always, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below. Videos like these, you're going to have disagreements with us, obviously. There's 16 teams. It's going to be fun. Tyler will go fight people in the comments, I guess.
Yeah, I'll be a comment warrior. Bring it on. Okay. Drop the hot takes. Let's go.
But either way, first team to get into is Utah. And Utah has a lot going on. The main story with Utah, if there is a main story with the Utes this year, Kyle Whittingham in his 21st year. Utah went 8-5 last year, but it's Cam Rising back from injuries. He's still going to be an amazing player. Now, how much will he be hampered by the injuries? We'll have to see. He's one tough customer, so I'd assume he'll play through it as much as he can, obviously. I don't know how that injury works. I've never been injured that bad before in my life, so I'm not going to try to comment on that. But you look at some of their key players. You've got Brant Keithy back at tight end. You've got an amazing defense as well. Junior Tafuna, defensive tackle. He's going to be a great guy to see. Kareem Reed, Zemiah Vaughn, and then Dorian Singer, one of the good wide receivers on this Utes team as well. Utah's schedule kind of hitting the highlights here as we'll try to do. You start the year with Southern Utah. You get that Thursday night conference play. You immediately jump into it, but technically not at the same time. Remember the way this worked with all the merging and stuff. Utah will host Baylor week 2, but I don't think that's being counted as a conference game because it was a non-conference last year.
Correct.
So the way they're doing that, you get Utah State at Oklahoma State September 21st, at home against Arizona September 28th. Game against TCU, not the biggest in terms of how we'd usually hype things up, but hey, it is an old Mountain West game. You get to see that again.
Hey,
that'll be fun. BYU Holy War November 9th, that one in Salt Lake City, and then the last game of the year on Black Friday at UCF. Now, looking at Utah's schedule this year, Utah's a team that I know we probably have some differences on, to say the absolute least, because I think Utah's going to be a pretty good contender in the Big 12. Now, that's a sentence you're about to hear me say about 7 times in a row, unfortunately, because the Big 12 might be the deepest it's ever been, despite losing Oklahoma and Texas.
Right.
This might be the deepest year for the Big 12 and maybe the most chaotic year the Big 12 has had. We'll see if it cannibalizes itself like it has before. We'll see if certain teams rise to the top. But as you can see by the tier list we have here, everything is going to fall into one of 6 tiers, whether it be elite, that's 11 to 12 wins in the regular season. Keep in mind, this is all regular season stuff.
We're not counting postseason.
This isn't saying, X team is going to make the playoffs and do this here or win a bowl game here. You have great, which is 9 to 10 wins. Good is 7 to 8. Average is 5 to 6. Bad is 4 to 5. And horrible is 0 to 2. We didn't feel like putting 3 on there because I forgot how to count. So 0 to 3 will be horrible as represented by the off-center 0 to 2.
Because it fits the horrible tier.
If you're horrible,
who cares if you win 2 or 3?
No one really cares.
Doesn't matter.
But looking at it, Utah's one of those teams that really, to me, it's that back-to-back slot, September 21st and 28th, Oklahoma State. You're going to Stillwater. That is the main game I see on their schedule that comes up as the big loss early. I think that's, you start 3-0, you stumble that game. How you respond against Arizona is going to be the biggest deal.
No, I really think I agree with you as far as the Oklahoma State game goes. That's going to be their welcome to the Big 12 moment. Yeah. That really will truly be it. I'm actually not worried for them in the Arizona game. Ready for I promised you off air some madness. I'm looking at the end of the season, November 29th. Utah rolls in with one loss to Oklahoma State, still very much in the Big 12 race. And up steps KJ Jefferson and the bounce house at Central Florida. I think that's a trap game for him. I think UCF's going to be good. I'm going 10 wins for Utah. Losses not to Arizona and Oklahoma State, but losses to Oklahoma State and UCF.
See, to me, it's one of those, if they lose a game that late in the season, bounce house could very well be it. BYU's a rivalry game. That one will be just more intense than usual.
Sure.
Iowa State, though, November 23rd. Iowa State's one of those teams that they're built to be a tough opponent. That's how Matt Campbell's always been there. They are going to have a ridiculously good defense, but I think Utah goes 11-1. I think they take that one stumble against Oklahoma State. That's their wake-up call in September. You know, usually Utah's one of those, if they're supposed to be good, they end up a little bit worse. I think this year it does not happen. I'm putting Utah in the elite tier.
Wow. Off the bat.
Yeah, okay. Right out of the gate, Utah, elite tier opponent for just about anybody you could play. But that brings us to number 2 on the list, and that is Kansas State. Wildcats obviously breaking in Avery Johnson this year. No Will Howard. He is off to Ohio State. Kansas State, Chris Kleiman in his 6th year coaching the Cats.
Already. Good.
Which is crazy to think about, yeah. 9-4 record last year, 6-3 in the Big 12. You've got DJ Giddens at running back. You've got some good defensive players as well. Austin Moore going to be a fun linebacker to watch. And Brendan Mott on the defensive line is going to cause some havoc at times for Kansas State. But it's going to be interesting because you look at their schedule. They have an early game, again, kind of similar we talked about with Utah. September 13th, Arizona at home, Friday Night Football. We got to talk about the week before that because September 7th, Kansas State goes to Tulane. Tulane is
sneaky.
A tough opponent.
Might be in the Group of 5 race.
Yeah, they might not have some of the players they've had from last year. They've got a different coach, obviously. But Tulane is going to be ready for that game. I mean, that is one of those, you build your season around games like that. They play K-State and Oklahoma back-to-back. Tulane does. That'll be tough. Kansas State has to deal with Oklahoma State as well. Then at Colorado, at West Virginia. Kansas is homecoming October 26th. They hit that stretch there. And then in the year with Cincinnati and at Iowa State. Cincinnati, a bit easier of a game for senior day, but Iowa State on the road to end the year will be tough.
Yeah, it will, but, their schedule, I think, kind of breaks in favor of them, right? Your big games, minus that Iowa State one, primarily at home. You don't really have that true horrible road test. I think the Iowa State game is arguably their biggest road test of the season. Look, talked with Logan Long a couple weeks ago. Logan Long, former tackle there at Kansas State. He just recently graduated, and we'll have more when we get to the Big Ten side of this, but he's got some good insight. He feels this is the strongest Kansas State has been in terms of depth and physical strength. They've done some real significant gains there in the weight room, do some shifting of staff, if you will, and he feels they're at a really good point conditioning-wise. And for how tough Kansas State usually is, that says something, right? The way you say, hey, this is the strongest team we have for a team that's known to be tough. That being said, Avery Johnson, is he ready for this moment? He's explosive. He's exciting. I think he'll show some signs of immaturity along the way. Not bad immaturity, but just having to learn how to win in those big clutch times. With that, I could see Kansas State winding up at 9 wins. I'm not sure, as you are, maybe a little bit more sure of this. The Big 12 champion may only have 9 or 10 wins by the end of it at the regular season. I mean, that's where I stand. I'm not sure if a team gets to 11 in this conference. I'm on the side of Campbellization. So give me Kansas State in the gray tier.
See, and that is interesting. We already have our first disagreement there. As you look directly at Utah, that 11-12 win mark there. But Kansas State, you mentioned how their schedule breaks for them. I kind of view it as they've got a few clusters together. That at Tulane, Arizona, Oklahoma State, you sneak BYU in there on the road. I think they lose at least one of those. I think it's pretty easy to say when you're playing teams like that, you're going to fall to one of them early in the season. Still Avery Johnson trying to get all the kinks worked out. Younger quarterback going to some interesting places and getting some big teams at home. And then the other stretch I see is at West Virginia. You get Kansas at home for homecoming. And then you have Iowa State there at the end of the year with Arizona State and Cincinnati. Arizona State and Cincinnati, they're going to be fine. That Iowa State game, I could see them losing.
Oh, yeah.
But I think West Virginia and Kansas and Colorado, even the week before that on the road, Houston after that, 3 road games in a stretch and your only home game's a rivalry, I think you drop one there. And so I'm putting Kansas State in the great tier.
Hey.
9 to 10 wins. I think that's fair for Kansas State.
There we go.
But that will move us on to Oklahoma State, which, despite having Ollie Gordon, maybe the best running back in college football this
Is
year,
the best running back.
Is the best running back.
Is the best running back.
Oklahoma State 10-4 last year, 7-2 in the Big 12. Went to the Big 12 championship game, lost to Texas. Mike Gundy, 20th year this year. Hard to think that he's been coaching that long. I can't remember because I was 5, but you can almost remember I'm a man, I'm 40 like it was.
Oh
yesterday.
yeah, no, I was a kid.
Yeah,
and
I
I remember
remember it.
watching that one on the news, thinking, "Who is this guy?"
He became one of the greatest coaches in the Big 12. That's who he became. But Oklahoma State absolutely loaded this year. Talk about offense a little bit. Ollie Gordon goes without saying. Amazing running back. But you've got some talent everywhere else. Alan Bowman at quarterback, some people, you wouldn't think of him as that much of a guy. He can make plays when you absolutely need him to at times. And so that is the definition of a good quarterback. Not great, not elite. You go by the same tier here. But what helps him out is when you get wide receivers like Brennan Presley, who can make amazing plays. You've got one of the greatest 1-2 linebacker punches you could have in the Big 12. That's Nick Martin and Colin Oliver. Oklahoma State is going to be explosive this year on both sides of the ball.
They've got all the weapons, as you mentioned, on both sides. The quarterback's the big question mark. You're a little more confident maybe in Bowman than I am. I'm really curious to see how that how that South Dakota State game goes early, simply because Bowman was in a 3-man quarterback contest last year, right? Zane Flores might be the real deal. Coach Gundy's talked him up all offseason as physically he's where he needs to be after redshirting last year. It's really come down to experience. Well, how else are you supposed to get experience other than being in the game? Things started going awry a little bit early, similar to last year, where the sky was falling momentarily. Do we see Zane Flores time? Can he succeed on that moment? Because I really feel he's just kind of one series away from coming in. You remember back to Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams, look at the OU side, right?
Yes.
I mean, Caleb came in, took that job seemingly in one big moment. So Flores, I think, could have some of that magic in there. I think that's the only real question mark for me, regardless of who's quarterbacking that team. I really like – I hate to say it. I really like how this all breaks for Oklahoma State. Yes, the road game against Kansas State is very tough, but other than that, you really don't have big road challenges. Colorado at the end of the season on a Black Friday, maybe a little interesting, right? I don't know if Colorado will be standing by the end of the season, though. That's the thing. Other than that, you've got Utah, but you get at Boone Pickens. So, and maybe that's a night game, places rocking, you got the advantage there. Give me Oklahoma State in the elite tier. That'd be my first elite team.
Looking at Oklahoma State's schedule is just fascinating to me because 5 of your first 6 games are at home. Now, notice I said 5 of your 6 and not 4 of your 6 because at Tulsa is a home game. There will be more OSU fans there than there are Tulsa fans.
Yeah.
South Dakota State, tough game. If you watch our Week 1 preview video, we go over that in more detail. Arkansas, you'll win that one at home. Arkansas is just not very good this year. That's just unfortunately a fact for the Razorbacks. At Tulsa, you'll win. I think they beat Utah at home, but then turn around and lose the next week at Kansas State. I think they stumble there. Then they get West Virginia back. That's a really tough 3-game stretch. I think OSU navigates it pretty well, goes 2-1. And after that, I agree with you on the schedule. Your toughest game after that bye is maybe at TCU, at Colorado, one of those two. I think they don't lose again. Put Oklahoma State in the elite tier at 11-1.
We're agreeing too much early. I don't like this.
Don't worry. It'll change, I'm sure. It usually does when we get into the middle of the pack here. And we're not there yet because Kansas is number 4 in the preseason poll. Kansas's schedule really doesn't have a whole lot of hits early on. First half of the season, your only really difficult game, in my opinion, is at West Virginia. You get a bye, Houston, at Kansas State. Then you get to that final stretch, which once again really is not that tough. Iowa State, at BYU, Colorado, Baylor. You look at Kansas's team, Lance Leipold, already year number 4 for him. I mean,
what a job he's
done. It feels like yesterday that he was there with a 2-win Kansas squad beating Texas and Austin, slowly, taking Oklahoma all the way to the wire at home, showing that he can start to build that program up. Kansas last year 9-4 overall, 5-4 in the Big 12. And you want to talk about offense. Let's start with the run game first. Let's ignore the giant Jayhawk in the room first. Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw Jr., 2 amazing running backs, and Jalen Daniels. The age-old question of how healthy will Jalen Daniels be? Because we all know what he is if he's healthy. We all know what Kansas is when he is not healthy. And then you add to the defensive side as well, great players like Kobe Bryant, not spelled that way, spelled with a C. Still a great player because, C for Kobe, C for corner. He knew what he was doing. His family knew what he was doing.
Oh, yeah.
But Kansas' schedule, I think, is really favorable to them, especially that first stretch. I think they can easily navigate that through 5-1. The only concern I have is Jalen Daniels himself. Not the player, but Jane Daniels, the body. If he can stay healthy, Kansas can be in that 10-11 win conversation. You probably lose, I would say maybe Kansas State. You drop another one of West Virginia or a road game somewhere in there. Iowa State will be a challenge as well. But if Kansas stays healthy, I am firmly putting them in the great tier, probably a 10-2 team.
And see, I'm kind of right there. If there was a tier where it was 8 to 9 wins, that's where I would side because I could see some road contests, obviously, at Kansas State. When they go to Morgantown, that's a tough one early. Maybe Arizona State could trip them up too. There's a world where I can see them drop an extra game or two where you think probably shouldn't have lost that. But I think overall, Lance Leopold's done an excellent job continuing to build up this program literally out of the ashes. I mean, Cade, we've talked about it plenty. At one point, we're thinking, man, do they go independent? I mean, like, they were a basketball-focused school, and football had fallen off the face of the earth, but they've really kind of revived themselves, and like one of the many teams in this conference that say, hey, why not us to be the face in the Big 12? I'd say Kansas solidly in the good to maybe great tier for me as well.
And that shifts things to one of the other newcomers. It's Arizona, 5th in the preseason poll. And my goodness, you look at Arizona, what they have is possibly special. I mean, last year you had a 10-3 team, 7-2 in the Pac-12. It's Brent Brennan now taking over in his first year after Jed Fish hightails it off to Washington. They have Noah Fafita, an amazing quarterback that really, once he established a rhythm midway through the season, Arizona could beat just about anybody. Not saying they could beat everybody, of course, but they could go toe-to-toe with nearly any team in the country and probably find a way to win. You've got good defensive players. You've got Takario Davis at corner. You've got Jacob Manu as a linebacker. You've got McMillan, one of the best wide receivers. Why are you wondering if I'm not pronouncing his first name? Because I don't want to embarrass myself on YouTube. That's why I'm not pronouncing his first name. All you need to know, Fafita to McMillan, going to be one of the best combinations in the Big 12 this season. You look at their schedule, first 3 games, New Mexico, Northern Arizona, but then you go to Kansas State on that Friday.
Welcome
you
to
go
the
to
Big 12.
Utah after a bye. You've got at BYU, which can be a difficult place to play depending on the right conditions. West Virginia at home, at UCF, and your final 3 games, Houston at TCU, and you end it with the good old duel in the desert against Arizona State.
Yeah, and this is a team that I want to believe in, but I'm not quite sure if they've got the depth yet, especially with Fish, like you mentioned, kind of going over to Washington, taking over that job. It's one of those where they'll be exciting, I think, for me, just in the good tier. I could easily see 4 losses, maybe a 5th if you kind of slip up in a spot where you're not supposed to. They'll be competitive, but not quite in the hunt for the Big 12 championship.
See, and then we disagree here a little. I see Arizona,
not everybody could go undefeated.
Like you said earlier, if there was an 8 to 9 win tier, that would be where they're. I think Arizona's a 9-3 team.
We're halfway
again.
agreeing.
Yeah, we're halfway agreeing. I think at Kansas State, at Utah, I think it's kind of similar to how they did last year. You get 2 big bumps early in the season. You ride back through, your Tech, BYU, Colorado. You drop West Virginia, UCF right there beside each other. I think it's inevitable you drop one of those. I could see a scenario where they lose, maybe go 8 wins or something like that. I just think they're a 9-win team sitting right there on the fence. So, kind of on the same page, but just slightly different.
You're just a bit higher. Just a bit higher.
This is where we probably break, and that's Iowa State. Because Iowa State is 6th. Iowa State, you would talk about a team that is interesting last year. 7-6 overall, but 6-3 in the Big 12. Matt Campbell, again, kind of talking about like a Lance Leipold, not in that same tier, and that he's built it from literally nothing. Matt Campbell's built it from almost nothing into a competitive year-in, year-out type of program. Iowa State, it's hard to believe, 9th year already for Matt Campbell, too. Just crazy to see how time flies like that. Rocco Beck, decent young quarterback last year, continuing to grow into the system. He's got Abu Sama III with him in the backfield. He's a fun running back to watch. But to me, it's Iowa State's defense. I mean, you talk about a Miles Purchase, a Caleb Bacon, Jeremiah Cooper, and Bo Frailer, both safeties there. They've got a good receiving core, flipping it back to the offense. Jaden Hickens, Jalen Noel. This is going to be a fun Iowa State team to watch. And you look at that schedule, though, for Iowa State, and that's where things become a little bit more interesting, to say the absolute least. At Utah, Kansas State, and at Kansas are 3 of their last 4 games. You look at, you've got at West Virginia, at Iowa. I want to believe in this Iowa State team. I think they can be a good team. And that's the tier they're going to go in, between 7 and 8 wins. I'd like to believe in them more, but just their schedule's too difficult compared to what we've already listed at the top.
And for me, I'm kind of along the same lines. I'm more of in the average tier where I think there's 6, maybe 7 wins, simply because despite having proven NFL talent, as we know, I think Brock Purdy, I think some of those top defensive players of the past, David Montgomery at running back, Matt Campbell's, dare I say, underachieved. And I know that's wild to say because they don't have the resources to claim that they get top-tier talent, but it seems like in seasons where buzz kind of gets created around in preseason, they just don't perform for whatever reason, right? So I think this is another – that coupled with the fact that it is pretty, I'd say, decently rough schedule among the upper half teams, I'm not sure Iowa State survives all those pitfalls. And I could see a world where they slip off and, you wind up 6-6 at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just one of those, I think the talent is going to be better than the outcome.
Right.
It's just the schedule they have. You give them, 1 or 2 different games, they could easily slide up into that grade.
Sure.
For me.
And I think we were going to say that a lot about this conference.
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be, that's why we started the video by saying this is the most wide open this conference has been in a while. And that will not change with the next team we're talking about because it's West Virginia in the 7th spot. Neil Brown, what a wonder he was able to turn out last year. 9-4 season, 6-3 in conference play. Hard to believe that. Garrett Green at quarterback, C.J. Donaldson at running back. That's a dynamic duo for sure. Jaheim White, the other running back they'll use. And Cole Taylor, fun tight end to watch as well.
Yeah, and, I was one of those people a couple years ago, really entering last season, man, how do you not get rid of Neil Brown? This is a disaster. This program's going in the tank. And in steps Garrett Green, and all the questions are actually answered, and you say, you know what, maybe Neil Brown's not doing such a bad job. For me, Garrett Green, depending on how that Penn State game goes to start the season, does he slide into dark horse Heisman candidacy? I like it. I've already, he wears number 6. He's 5'10", 200 pounds. Is he a little Baker Mayfield style type of guy, a little gunslinger, a little moxie? Cade, I'm not going to lie. I think West Virginia will be in the good tier, if not great tier by the end of the season, depending on how some of these break. I mean, you look at the conference schedule, yes, you got to go to Oklahoma State, but I don't see a huge pitfall. You host Kansas State. You host UCF. There's no real game on the road where I say, man, I don't think they could win that one. I like them in the good, maybe great tier. I think they can push for Big 12 title contention.
See, West Virginia's schedule, they are in the same spot as Iowa State to me, for the schedule-wise at least. You have Penn State, and then, you get Albany. Congratulations.
Sure.
You're going to get the win there. But then at Pitt, which, granted, Pitt is not great, but that is a tough rivalry game, and you get Kansas right after. A bye week, and then the 4-game stretch of October of at Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, at Arizona. I feel like you drop at least 2 of those in that middle there. Penn State, I think they're going to lose that one. Kansas, I think they can lose as well. You get to the bottom part, UCF, Tech right there back-to-back. You could drop one there. West Virginia is firmly in the 7 to 8 tier for me.
Hashtag Green for Heisman 2024.
Okay. We're not doing that. You can do that, Tyler, but I'm not doing that. I think he's a good quarterback. He's right where he should be. Good quarterback, but not great or elite.
He's just, there's something about him. You watch that man, he's exciting. And you mentioned he's got a partner in crime at running back. Like, they've got the run game, and all he's got to do is make a couple key throws, and magic could happen, I think.
It absolutely could. Another team where I think now we're going to flip it on the other end. We're at UCF at number 8. If you remember last year, I was high on UCF. It didn't happen. I'm proud to report that I learned nothing from last year because UCF 6-7, 3-6 in the Big 12, fourth year for Gus Malzahn. You look at what UCF's brought in. KJ Jefferson comes in at quarterback from Arkansas. You still have R.J. Harvey. You have Kobe Hudson at wide receiver. You've got some good D linemen as well, Lee Hunter, Malachi Lawrence. But this is a UCF team that I think Gus kind of has his quarterback. You had a similar type in John Rice Plumlee last year. He was a dual threat guy, but he got injured. KJ Jefferson, you have kind of that bigger quarterback that can maybe take another hit or two. UCF's schedule works out favorably well for them. The first 3 games, it's New Hampshire, Sam Houston, at TCU. I think they can win all 3 of those. Colorado at home, I think they can win. Florida, I think they can compete with a little bit in the swamp. Cincy at Iowa State, BYU, Arizona, Arizona State, West Virginia, Utah. You dodge most of the big bads on your schedule, at least at certain points in time when you absolutely need to get a break. I think UCF, looking at it, we're counting up 4, we're counting up 5, put in a 6, a 7, and maybe even an 8. I think UCF stays in that good tier with a great opportunity to be in the great tier.
Hey, look at us on the same page because I echo a lot of those sentiments. I mean, you see how, depending on, especially late season, where is this team at after 6 games, and where are those opponents like Utah, Arizona, Arizona State, and West Virginia, that back half of the schedule, right? Depending on how those teams are, UCF could slide up, or maybe the wheels falls off. It's Gus Malzahn. He's gone both ways before, right? And KJ Jefferson, he's a likable quarterback. He's the quintessential fun college quarterback. Don't know if he'll ever be really a pro quarterback, but if he gets hot, man, watch out. It's just he can also, kind of like Gus, they could go the wrong way. So I think the good tier is a good one for him just to see, in the middle where they go.
And UCF's schedule to be, I think the breaking point, I don't know where you'll agree with me, if you'll agree with me with all of this. To me, the breaking point is that Florida game. That is the true barometer, I think, of they can easily be 4-0 coming into that game. If you find a way to win there, you come back, you get Cincy, you can be 6-0 going to Ames. There's a real possibility in that. You somehow, you find a way to win there, BYU at home, you could be 8-0 or 7-1 with Arizona coming to town in November. You have the possibility for that big setup there, and then your final 3 games, Arizona State, at Arizona State, a little bit more difficult, obviously, then your bye week, and then your big 2 at the end where I think if it's really falling off by that point, to take it the other way, where it'll just be a brutal end of the season at West Virginia and Utah at home.
No, I completely agree. It kind of reminds me of OU's schedule last year, right? They got to that Texas game, hadn't really played anybody, got the big win. Then from that point, it kind of broke off a little bit. But for UCF, that Florida game's a similar feel, right? You get to that undefeated, you win that. All of a sudden you look and you say, okay, if we can just capitalize on a couple of these games down the stretch, we're right there. So, or the wheels fall apart entirely. Who knows?
And that moves us on to team number 9. We're already halfway through the Big 12 here. It's Texas Tech with an interesting team, to say the least. Joey McGuire in his 3rd year, 7-6 last year were the Red Raiders, 5-3 in the Big 12. Now, Texas Tech has the ability to go on offense. Taj Brooks, phenomenal running back. They've got good wide receivers like Josh Kelly. It's going to be up to Baron Morton. It really is. He has that ability. Talk about fun college quarterbacks. When does Texas Tech ever seem to have a truly bad quarterback? They really don't. It seems no matter who it is, even if the team is bad, you can have a guy like Patrick Mahomes on it, of all people, or you can have the exact opposite, where you have a seemingly good team and your quarterback play is just okay. But either way, Tech never seems to have a truly bad quarterback. And their schedule, though, is the interesting thing to me, because you get this early test at Washington State. And that might seem like, okay, it's Washington State, they lost Cam Ward, who cares? Early September up there on the Palouse, where everyone's still trying to find themselves, Washington State is almost like a Texas Tech. Right down to the fact that Mike Leach coached it both, right down to the fact that a lot of people see them as this smaller school in the middle of nowhere. You get there and you realize, oh, we're in a whole different building than we thought we were going to be in. They could go up there and easily put Washington State away. They could go up there and stumble like they did last year against Wyoming, and the train immediately leaves the station and falls off the rails before it can even go a mile. We're going to have to see a lot of Texas Tech to figure out how good they are, because their schedule looks favorable if they can hold on. After Wazoo, it's North Texas, Arizona State, and Cincinnati all at home. You set yourself up for a big game at Arizona. You get that bye, rivalries with Baylor, TCU. You go to Iowa State. You get Colorado. But then after your last bye, your last 2 weeks of November are at OSU and West Virginia. And that's where things really start to set in.
It does. And, the tough part is I like Joey McGuire as a coach. I think he, for a program like Tech is the right type of voice you want, a guy that, is going to constantly believe in you to the upper limits of whatever your perceived ability is. The problem right now going into this season is I don't think the schedule breaks great for him. They're still plagued with some depth issues, and I think some inconsistencies will rear their head throughout the season. Times will probably look really good when they shouldn't, and you're going to scratch your head. You mentioned the Wyoming game. Perfect example last year. They shouldn't have dropped that one, but they did, and then there's times later in the season where you go, oh, okay, here's Tech, right? They're getting and competing with some of these teams. I think some of the bigger news is not going to occur on the field this year. It's already occurred because Patrick Mahomes is seemingly starting to get more involved in trying to build up that program from a financial standpoint. Announced a $5 million donation. It's a big year for McGuire to kind of prove to a guy like that, hey, yes, I am taking this program in the right direction. What does that mean in wins, though? That's the tough part to conjugate. I think they're average. I think we see a repeat last year. They're more along the lines of anywhere from a 5, 6, maybe 7-win team.
And I agree with you. I think Texas Tech, if we looked at it at I'm going to sound really weird about how I say this, but I think they are a 7-win team if they weren't a team like Texas Tech, where they're going to win a game they shouldn't, but they're going to lose a game or two they shouldn't. And unfortunately for me, that's how the tier list goes. I'd like to put them in good, but I think they fall as a 6-6 team. They'll make a bowl game, but I think they're going to find a way to lose a game like an at TCU.
Right.
Or maybe drop into an Arizona State or Cincy, a game that you just leave your head scratching, how in the world did that happen? But we have another team to get to because it is team number 10. It is TCU. Sonny Dykes, year number 3 in the roller coaster that has been his 2 years at TCU. 5-7 last year, 3-5 in the Big 12. Now, there are some weapons for the Frogs. You've got Eric McAllister. You've got Savion Williams as wide receivers. Drake Dabney's a good tight end as well. They've got some good defensive players as well. But again, the question is going to be, how fast can TCU go and how favorable does their schedule look? And, well, you look at the first 6 games, you've got some hits, you have some misses. UCF, at SMU, at Kansas, all games that if you could win them are giant wins to get the season going strong. But if you lose, everything can fall apart easily.
It can, and I think a lot is going to ride. We talked about Avery Johnson. A lot for TCU is going to have to ride on Josh Hoover. Kind of moved into that job last year towards the middle end of the year. Had some great moments, threw for 400 yards and a win against Baylor. Looked really good against OU, tore up that defense. But there was also some games in there against Texas Tech, 2 picks, only 1 touchdown. They lose that one by 7. Against Kansas State, they had him guessing all game long. So how does he mature? I think TCU plays a little bit better than people think, but ultimately I'm picturing probably a 7-win team, maybe a 6-win team. So in between average and good for me. They'll pop a little bit, but a team that I think ultimately will continue to maybe mature throughout the season. And by next year, you bring Hoover back as a junior, a little bit more weapons around him, set themselves up for maybe a good run next year.
And that's where I think TCU is. I talked about the first half. I think there's 3 pretty losable games all in a row. You look at the back half, and you have at Utah, Oklahoma State at home, Arizona at home. You've got 3 big games there, and who knows what happens with Tech and Baylor in that stretch capped by Utah and Oklahoma State. As much as I'd like to believe in TCU this year, I think they're just an average 6-6 team. It's better than last year by 1 win.
Yeah.
And to be fair to TCU fans, the last time I said TCU was an average team they were in the national championship.
So maybe
game.
so, yeah.
I was going back and looking at that. I was like, yeah, TCU go
Yeah.
5-7 that year. We all were kind of, maybe 7-5, something like that. Nope, 13 wins. It doesn't matter. Big 12 championship game appearance. So you never know. That's the main point I'm trying to get at here.
And I think the interesting part is that you look at two teams in the same tier, and I think the narratives by the end of the season are going to be wildly different. McGuire at Tech will maybe have people questioning if he's the right guy truly, whereas TCU with Sonny Dykes will say, okay, he's getting back on track, and they're back on the path to maybe push themselves up to the top of conference again.
And now we get to the fun one, Tyler, because it is now Colorado's time to shine. 11th in the preseason poll. Colorado, you know who's at Colorado. It's Deion Sanders in his second year. 4-8 last year, only won one Pac-12 game, though. Shedeur Sanders returning at quarterback. You still have the phenomenal athlete. I mean, truly, you talk about just position athlete. That's all he needs to be. That's Travis Hunter.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a guy you could put nearly anywhere on the field, and he's going to make a play at some point. You've also got, some decent defensive players. You're starting to build more on that depth in the trenches and just on the field as well. I'm excited to see guys like LaJohntay Wester, how they do at wide receiver as well. Get Shedeur some more weapons. How does Shiloh develop on the defensive side of the ball? But you look at Colorado's schedule, and you look at North Dakota State on a Thursday night to start the season. You look at Nebraska, Saturday night, week 2. What I've been told by Nebraska people, not saying I have insider sources, just the general vibe around that fan base, that is the most happy they are to see a team on the schedule since Miami went there in 2014. That was the game where Nebraska fans had 30 years of hatred boiled up for Miami, and it all got released at once. It was one of the louder games in recent memory for Nebraska. And everything I've said from Nebraska fans is expect that same atmosphere that night. Then you get Colorado State on the road. We all know what happened in that game last year. We all know Colorado State's bringing people back. I don't think it will happen, but they could be 0-3 entering Big 12 play. I think they'll be 1-2. Baylor, first conference game. It's homecoming. Desperately need to win that game.
Yeah.
It's weird to say that before the season's even starting,
Right.
but I think that's a desperate, need to win that game because then it's UCF on the road. Then it's Kansas State and at Arizona, at Texas Tech, Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma State, the last 3 to end the year. Colorado could be an improved team. Colorado could even look like an 8-win team at times. But with that last 4 games on their schedule, K-State and Arizona thrown in, and what I think North Dakota State and Nebraska will do, plus you add a road trip here and there, I'm sorry, Colorado is going to be in the bad tier.
Ooh, as much as I would like to say that, Deion will rise above all the negativity maybe, and Shedeur will be able to show, hey, yes, I am one of the top quarterbacks in this class. I think I agree with you. There's ups and downs. The schedule does not look great, right? Too many big games early where you say, oh, these are tough environments. Colorado State's not going to be afraid because of what happened last year. They have no fear of this Colorado team, right? They look at them and say, hey, we shredded them last year. Nebraska, like you mentioned, they're hungry. They've got their guy at quarterback. They think they got their guy head coach, Matt Rule. And I think what happens is Deion, the local media, does that get a little too loud of a battle throughout the season? Does that distract the team? Does Shedeur correct some of those mistakes? Yes, the line wasn't great last year, but you could also credit some of those sacks to Shedeur trying to make too big of plays, right? He's trying to hold the ball, be the hero. Can he learn to just say, hey, I'll take what's there, right? It may all be too much. I think the pressure for once in Deion's life may be just a bit too much. I'm hope I'm wrong because I'm not going to lie. Part of me likes the braggadocious side of Deion, especially when he backs it up, right? But I think this time the pressure might just be a bit too much. I agree with you as far as the bad tier.
And see, and this is why I at least did it for this tier list. You're probably going to see on this one only. You're probably wondering, we are 30, nearly 40 minutes into this video. Why does bad and average both have 5 wins on it?
Right.
This is why. Texas Tech could be a 5-7 team, and I could see the ups and downs of it and go, okay, overall throughout the season they were still average.
Sure.
They found some breaks in their schedule. They played a few games above competition. I don't think Colorado can play above competition because of the target they have put on themselves. They are going to get everybody's A game.
Yeah.
Whether it be, Cincinnati or whether it be Oklahoma State and Utah.
Yeah.
they are going to get the best shot of everybody, and it's going to result in some games like last year. They went to Pullman late in the season. Hey, Washington State's not playing that great. They have the same record as I do, and you lose 56-14 or 56-7 or whatever it was. That is bad. That is a bad team looking horrible is what that is. That's why Colorado, to me, is in the bad tier and not average.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to be a target when you're a Georgia, when you're Alabama, when you're Ohio State, when you've got the guys to say, okay, hey, we know we're going to get your best, don't matter. When you're a team like Colorado, a program that, look, Deion took over a complete program disarray. It was a much improved year compared to what they were before last year, even though it was only 4 wins. But it's tough to be braggadocious and then back it up when you know you don't really have the depth to do so. You got some players, but you don't overall have it top to bottom, maybe.
And the thing that worries me about Colorado, more the program than anything else, the Oregon game last year, Dan Lanning comes out and basically says, we're not a TikTok team, does all that. It's 35-0 at halftime, and his halftime interview says, we won't keep proving a point. You don't think that's going to happen against Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State 3 games in a row to end the year?
Yeah.
Or Kansas State and Arizona back-to-back? How many of those types of games can you sustain as a program without going, yes, we appreciate what Deion's done, making Colorado relevant, even though they really haven't done anything besides having him as their coach to be relevant nationally wins-wise? How long of that can Colorado take before this whole thing comes tumbling down, before it can truly get started?
I know we're not in NFL season yet. You want the hot take for the NFL season?
Well, what is your hot take for the NFL season, Tyler?
It won't matter what Deion does this season because old Jerry's going to come a-calling, and it's the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and they're drafting Shedeur.
See, I don't disagree. Not the Cowboys part, but I truly think Deion could be gone after this year. I truly think when Shedeur goes, he goes. It would not shock me if that's what he did. Because that's who, in my opinion, you mentioned it too, that's who Deion's always been. Deion cares about Deion a lot. And he cares about his family a lot. There's no doubt about that. But he's going to do what he sees best for him. And being scrutinized every day for, having to do the job of a coach and not doing the job of being Deion, I think at some point that he's going to say, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
But enough ranting and raving about Colorado.
About future Dallas Cowboys coach Deion Sanders.
Yeah, about future things that may or may not happen. We're going to talk about it from a different team. Baylor. They're number 12. Dave Aranda, year number 5 with the Bears. Baylor last year just 3-9, 2-7 in conference play. They've got a good transfer quarterback. It's DeQuan Finn from Toledo. He had a solid year for the Rockets last year, to say the absolute least. And Baylor's always going to have some good defensive players under Dave Aranda. The problem with Baylor has been for a while, and this is the problem I think most Baylor fans have correctly pointed out, the NIL game was not really there. They're trying to change that a lot this year, down to the shirts that say, with the Baylor logo, we pay players. Baylor's trying to get that culture shift. They're trying to become more and more competitive this year. And you look at week 2 and they go to Utah. And that's going to determine a lot. They start the year with Tarleton State. Tarleton State's a top 25 FCS team. They're not a slouch. Now, granted, they did just get their quarterback hurt in week 0. So what I'm saying right now could be absolutely meaningless. But
correct. That
could be a closer game than you think. Air Force. You remember what happened the last time Air Force played Baylor? That was not a fun bowl game for them to watch. At Colorado, at Iowa State, at Texas Tech, OSU at home, TCU at home, at West Virginia, at Houston even could be a tough game for them. And Kansas at home, there are a lot of traps in Baylor's schedule.
Yeah, the only real big dog they avoid, obviously, is Kansas State, and talk about that schedule. And, Dave Aranda, I think, from an X's and O standpoint, is a good coach. You mentioned the NIL issues. Dave Aranda is not a guy I picture going in and inspiring boosters to get that money, right? And I think that, at the end of the day, has kind of doomed him more than anything. It's good to see them trying, but it might be a little bit too little too late, at least for this season. Maybe they change that in upcoming seasons. But I really think by the end of the season, Aranda's probably gone. And you're looking at a bottom of the conference team. I mean, I hate to say it, but Baylor just, for whatever reason, had that flash under Aranda, and then it has dissipated, and they haven't been able to capitalize on any tangible momentum. Yes, the defense usually produces some players, but when's the last time we've seen a consistently solid Baylor offense? It's been a few years at this point, and they haven't been able to correct those issues.
And the thing about it, you mentioned Aranda probably being gone this year. I think Baylor improves from horrible to bad, but a one-win improvement, I think they can go 4-8, is not going to be enough to save his job.
Not enough.
You've got to find a rabbit out of a hat, and I don't think they can find it this year.
He should call up Neil Brown and ask for secrets.
I mean, he should, honestly. I mean, try to find a way to get a fan base to do a complete 180 on you. But jumping over to the next team to talk about, it's BYU. BYU still coached by Kalani Sitake in his 9th year. BYU, kind of a similar boat, went 5-7 last year, only 2-7 in the Big 12. Now, they've got some good defensive players. They've got a guy like Tyler Batty, a great defensive end that'll be fun to watch again this year. Jack Kelly, a linebacker, he'll be good. They've got a phenomenal running back in L.J. Martin. But what can BYU put together when you've got interesting games on your schedule to start the game? Just listen to this 3-game stretch. After Southern Illinois, you go to SMU on a Friday night. You go to Wyoming, which is still a tough place to play. That elevation makes it way tougher than it should be. And Kansas State at home to come back to after that. Another 3-game stretch. Arizona, Oklahoma State, both at home. Then you go to Orlando to play UCF. And another tough stretch at Utah, Kansas at home, and then at Arizona State, which can be a bit of a trap game coming off two probably top 20 opponents, to say the least.
And again, it's a situation where you look at the schedule, coupled with the fact that they just overall don't have some of that explosive talent on offense that they would need to match what they've got on defense. And you look at a team that's going to struggle because they don't duck any of the top of the conference. And where's the momentum coming from? You need to build some confidence with a team like this early. I don't know if they could do it. You might be able to rip off a couple wins early, but after that, things really start getting tough. And I would put them right kind of the bad to almost horrible tier. I think, again, another bottom of the conference type team.
And unfortunately for me, that's where I've got BYU. They are the first team to fall into the horrible tier. I think they go 3-9. I think it's going to be a rough year for BYU. I think they get tripped up by a game or two they shouldn't. Looking at you at Wyoming and Arizona State, one of those two, you avoid that, you're probably in bad tier. I think that it's just going to be one of those snake bit types of years for BYU where even when they show signs of success, something bad's going to happen to them. I think a prime example of that last year. They play Oklahoma State the last game of the season. They are controlling that game, and then everything goes off the rails. They come back to force overtime and double overtime, and then they still fall flat on their face and just short at the end. I think you can get a few games like that this season that are just aggravating as you can get out of it. But BYU, I just don't see a whole lot going for them. That'll put the next team up as we officially enter the bottom 3 of the Big 12, which has 16 teams. Just always fun to say that. Just completely have a different name in the conference. But, hey, that's okay. That is the world we live in now. Cincinnati. Scott Satterfield in his second year. Cincinnati last year went 3-9, 1-8 in the Big 12. They've got some interesting pieces here. Corey Kiner's a good running back. They still have the godfather himself, Dante Corleone, at defensive tackle. Just such a fun name to say.
It is.
You got an all-name team for the Big 12. He's on that list.
Yes.
He kind of has to be by default. But there's a reason why Cincinnati's ranked at number 14. They are not going to be good on offense. I really don't think so. I mentioned, of course, a running back will probably be good. I don't see a lot of amazing pieces that stand out to me to this Cincinnati team. You look at their first 5 games, though. It's Towson, Pitt, both at home, at Miami of Ohio, Houston, and to Texas Tech on the road. If they can string some confidence together, you can win some of those games, and you could have a pretty good start to the season. You dodge a lot of that traffic early on. The problem is, though, the last 4 games, West Virginia, at Iowa State, at Kansas State, and then TCU, I don't see a whole lot for Cincinnati here. I hate to say that for them, but I really don't. This is going to be one of those years that is going to be brutal. Just completely honest, I think the first 3 games you could be 3-0 and maybe find a way to win 1, maybe 2 at most Big 12 games.
Well, and see, this is where I'm at. I believe out of the BYU, Baylor, Houston, Cincinnati, Arizona State group, one of those teams will slide up and either just get bowl eligible or be right close, 5 wins. I think Cincinnati is that team for those reasons you mentioned with the schedule. They've got a little bit defensively. I think on the offensive side, if you could piece together that run game and have that be the focus, you'd be a little tough. get just enough out of the passing game, the schedule lines up with you being able to sneak just a couple conference wins, and you're able to slide into that average tier. So that's where I'd put them. I think they could sneak their way there. I wouldn't expect much more than that, though.
Yeah, like I'm going to be generous and put them in the bad tier. I think they're very easily on the line of 3 to 4. I'll be nicer with them because of the schedule they have.
Sure.
But I still don't see, even with that favorable 5-game stretch, I still can see a way they stumble to Pitt. That's a rivalry game. Miami of Ohio right there as well. And Houston and Texas Tech. Going to Texas Tech's never an easy place. Houston's rebuilding as well, but they've got a great coach in Willie Fritz. And it's funny enough because Houston is that next team to talk about. Houston, as I just mentioned, Willie Fritz, the head coach, his first year there. Miracle turnaround at Tulane. I mean, you're talking about multiple double-digit win seasons, a Cotton Bowl win over Caleb Williams and Southern Cal. But Houston went 4-8 last year and 2-7 in the Big 12. Houston's defense, not that great. You're taking over for what Dana Holgorsen was able to do. You're going to have some offensive talent there, and one of the guys you have is Donovan Smith. Donovan Smith's a fun quarterback to watch. He may not be a great quarterback or even good, and sometimes he doesn't even play average. But he will be a very entertaining quarterback to watch. Houston starts the year with UNLV. They go to Oklahoma and then get Rice. And, I mean, the schedule at times, it looks winnable at Cincinnati, Iowa State, at TCU. You can maybe try to snatch 2 out of 3 with a lot of luck going your way. But then other stretches, Kansas on the road, Utah, Kansas State, both at home, at Arizona, Baylor, and at BYU in the final 3-game stretch of the year. I'd like to see Houston improve a little bit, but that schedule's just too much for them. They don't dodge a whole lot in the Big 12.
Here's what Vegas thinks. They're only a 1.5-point favorite at home against UNLV to begin the season.
Yeah.
If that doesn't tell you much, I just think the schedule's too much. They don't duck anybody in terms of the big top of the conference teams. They need to get OU out of conference that might throttle you as well. I think Willie Fritz could very well get there because, as you mentioned with Tulane, he was able to take a little and make it a lot, right? And while the cupboard isn't completely bare at Houston, unfortunately, they did not come into the conference at a spot where they were rising, right? Like Utah is, or like an Arizona is. So that put them behind the 8 ball. And I think it's going to take a little bit to dig out of that. For me, they're right there with BYU, probably bottom of the conference at the end of the day.
And that I agree with you 100%. I think Houston, if they were just slightly better, just in general. I mean, you could talk about, slightly better on the defensive side of the ball or the offensive side. You could just change one of those a little bit, maybe add a player or two. I could see bad, but they just don't have anything.
Well, and I think it'll be tough year one for Fritz with what's on the roster to really hammer down a clear identity. If he could do it, then it only speaks to what we've talked about, him being a really good coach, right? And even if they have a bad season, I don't think that's all on him. It's going to take a year, I think, to really kind of get things in order how he wants it and figure out who's legit on that roster as far as guys he could build with and who's got to be replaced. So it'll be kind of that year, I feel, for Fritz, a good old Willie, first time around.
And I think Houston, it would not shock me to see them go the way of Tulane and that they have a few bad years.
Sure.
Where you can see the progress, on the field, but not in the record book. And then they just explode off the charts. And you're thinking, well, how did Houston win 9 games? Because he's a good coach. This is a guy they can recruit. If he can win at Tulane, he can win just about anywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
Plus, you're talking about a guy that played for Pittsburgh State, Kansas in the 80s. And had a
yes, sir.
This is a great photo. It's one of my favorite. That's a college football photo right there. But we got one more team to talk about in the Big 12, and that is Arizona State. And I'm going to tell you a few things about Arizona State. Tyler, you already know what I'm about to say.
2 words, Cam Scattaboo, baby.
Yeah, there you go. Cam Scattaboo, the running back. Kenny Dillingham in his second year with the program, 3-9 last year, where the Sun Devils 2-7 in Pac-12 play. And Arizona State might not have been good, but they were entertaining to watch. Some of their games were just absolutely madness. They went through 4 or 5 different quarterbacks throughout the year, still trying to figure out who their quarterback is. Just that seems like the never-ending question for them. At some point in time, Cam Scattaboo was the quarterback and the running back and the receiver and the punt returner. I was going to say,
did some punting it was.
Yeah, punt returner, kick returner, punter. He can do just about anything you need him to do. The only problem is, you have to play 11 guys, and they don't have 11 Cam Scattaboos. And you look at their schedule, Wyoming to start the year, that'll be a tough game for them, by the way.
Only a 6.5-point favorite
Only
at
a
home.
6.5-point favorite. Mississippi State comes to town at Texas State, at Texas Tech, Kansas, Utah, at Oklahoma State, UCF, at K-State. BYU's a home game, and then you go to Arizona to end the year for some fun rivalry action there. As much as I'd like to see Arizona State have success, purely because Cam Scatterby was a fun player to watch.
Forget Arizona State having success. I just want to see Cam Scatterby. Why did nobody bail him out of that place with NIL? Come on.
He wants to win there. He wants to be the guy.
Could you imagine Cam Scatterby at Kansas State? Oh, my God.
I mean, it's just
he's
one of those guys that just – talk about a football player that could do truly anything.
Yes.
Him, but just, I'm looking at it right now. Arizona State trying to find – wins is a challenge. Wyoming, then we take a while. Cincinnati, maybe. Texas State, that's at San Marcos. That could be a little bit more difficult for them.
Yeah, Texas State's
a good,
J.J. Kinney quietly building,
Yeah, Mississippi State at home, they can win it. I don't think they're going to, though. Yeah. Texas Tech, no. So you're getting one win. Kansas, Utah, no. Cincy, maybe. 3 wins if everything breaks their way. They are the definition of a horrible tier team.
Yeah, and I'll say maybe, horrible and a half could slide into that bad tier, just depending on how 1 or 2 of those games break, but not getting beyond that, right? The cap is probably 4 wins.
Yeah, and so you can see pretty clearly, at least in my tier, what I have the Big 12 championship game ending up as. The 2 elite tier teams, Utah and Oklahoma State. I think they only each will lose the 1 conference game. I think everyone else has a bit more confusion in there. This great to good could easily change. Utah and Oklahoma State could easily fall into that as the season goes on, and you have an 8-team race for who goes to Arlington. Big 12 is going to be an absolute blast this year, but at the end of the day, I think Oklahoma State's able to beat Utah in Stillwater. It's hard to beat a good team twice. I think Oklahoma State finds a way to do it.
No, I think
the Pokes win the Big 12.
Oh, the Pokes won the Big 12, so we're agreeing on that.
Yeah.
Although
we're agreeing on how the championship game goes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think there could be, at the end of the season, that battle of the face of the Big 12, right? Kansas State wants to claim it, not quite there yet. Utah, Oklahoma State, for the true throwdown that they've been talking all offseason long about. But I think our tier list works out well because I truly believe anybody in that good tier up definitely has a chance, depending on how things go. And I do think the dividing line is very much Texas Tech and TCU, right? Like, that's your litmus test. Are you better than Tech and TCU, or are you worse? Because that's going to decide your conference future for this season.
And, I mean, it's one of those, I agree with you. I think, any of the good teams can jump up. Any of these 5 combinations in elite and great.
Oh, absolutely.
Any of them could easily win the Big 12.
Yeah.
You can convince me any of these 5 pretty easily. These 3 take a little bit more. We're at the point of no return once we get to
Garrett Green for Heisman 2024.
But it'll be fun to see. I don't know what you said, so I can't even react to what your joke was.
I said Garrett Green for Heisman 2024.
Okay. That's kind of what I thought you had said, but I didn't hear it all the way. It was just either way, we need to end this now before this episode goes completely off the rails. As always, thank you for watching. Feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments down below. As we always say, it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it does mean a lot to us. So, as always, folks, have a good one, everyone.